Many of you know I'm somewhat of a fashion nerd. Having grown up in the South, clothes were a way to feel as though I could live like those in the big cities of New York and Los Angeles. It serves as escapism for a lot of people, and I think today's guest would agree. Nick Roberts is the PR front behind some of the most celebrated brands in menswear, as well as a little company called Hodinkee, formerly the world's largest watch blog, but could very well be dubbed the world's best watch-related lifestyle brand of today. I sat down with Nick to chat about growing up outside of Chicago, reading Esquire and GQ, and what exactly a public relations company actually does. I was fascinated with Nick's story and how he began his company, Lawrence & Co., because he's only been in operation for just over a year and has clients that can only be characterized as some of the most renowned menswear businesses in New York City and, in some cases, arguably the world. A few takeaways from this chat are most certainly the fact that knowing what your passions are and planning ahead can be instrumental for one's career, as well as the human connection is still, in fact, paramount in today's digital age. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard Age Podcast. Nick, thank you so much for doing the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing.
Sure.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a town called McHenry, Illinois.
Okay.
It's about an hour and a half northwest of Chicago and sort of an hour and a half south west of Milwaukee. So kind of all on the Illinois-Wisconsin border. Small town. It's a little bit bigger now, but, probably about 15,000 people now. But, I go back quite often just because my family's still there. Probably every, 3 months or so. And it's just nice to be home. But that's where I kind of grew up. So I'm kind of think, what else can I say about McHenry?
What'd your parents do?
So my dad works in real estate, still working. And my mom was a teacher and also stayed at home too. So she raised us. I'm the third of four. So I have one brother and two sisters. And they're all back in Illinois now, and I'm the odd guy out who's still on the East Coast. And my mother's
the
always
lone wolf.
The lone wolf, and my mother's always like, "When are you moving back to Illinois?" And I always say, "When they have an industry that can support my life." So, so we're not quite sure when that would happen, but so I think I'm going to be on the East Coast for a little bit while longer.
Sure. Well, look, what were the things that you were doing as a kid? Like, what were you into?
Oh, growing up, big sports guy. Basketball. Growing up in Chicago in the 90s, you had the Bulls, obviously. Growing up with, Michael Jordan and things like that, we would always have, there are harder times now, still a Bulls fan, but we'd always have, neighborhood parties where we'd have everyone over and we'd put the TV out or like on the screen-in porch and get a cardboard cutout of Michael and do all that sort of stuff. So basketball. Basketball played a big part of my life. I was a pretty serious basketball player growing up, even though I'm not that tall. I kind of, peaked in sophomore year of high school in my growth spurt, which was unfortunate. But basketball always played a big part of my life. And then played a lot of tennis. So I was also a very competitive tennis player. State, all that sort of stuff, travel, tennis, that sort of thing. But for me, growing up in that area, like sports was the thing. And also kind of like being the third of four, you kind of got to find your spot within the family, and sports was my thing. Everyone else had their own thing, but sports was my thing. So
I feel like most people from Chicago they're always into sports.
I think
be it guys, girls,
sure,
no matter what.
Maybe this is a hot take. Sorry for other sports cities, but I honestly, and I'm probably jaded in my opinion, but I think Chicago is the best sports city.
Well, you have everything.
We have everything. There's just such passion about it, and also just like such cultural icons of sports come from Chicago. And I think there's a whole Saturday Night Live skit just like based on, like the 85 Bears.
The Bears, yeah.
So it's kind of like sports in Chicago have just sort of like transcended to become a cultural thing in itself. So
Sure. So what did any of those sports take you into school? Were you scholarship or
I wasn't
like
scholarship.
Okay.
I wasn't good. So, I wasn't good enough to,
You were traveling, but not scholarship.
Yeah. I was good enough in tennis to play like Division III. And so I had a couple offers to do that. However, for me, I didn't want to go. Growing up, I grew up in a small town, but I always sort of had big city aspirations. I just knew I was a city person, even though I had never really been to a city very often. I mean, Chicago was close, but I didn't go there too often. But I just always knew that like I was supposed to be sort of like in a metropolitan area. That's just, I kind of had that feeling for myself. And so when going through college and trying to figure out, what I wanted to do with my life, sports is one way, but I was like, I'm never going to be a professional athlete. There's no way I'm going to like be able to support my life doing this. So even though I had those couple offers for like D3 things, I was like, you know what, it's great. It'd be cool. But like, I didn't want to go to, no offense to Iowa, just didn't want to go in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, and have nothing around me and just like be in a spot for 4 years. So I decided not to do that and just went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So, which was a nice buffer for me, because for me, I had always wanted to move to New York. In high school, I knew it. Basically, funny enough, is kind of, this could maybe transition to the whole career thing we can get into, but funny enough, I was always interested in fashion. I think of it kind of came from my dad, because my dad wore a suit every day to work and that sort of thing, and he would shine his shoes every Sunday night. And
so is he commercial real estate?
Commercial real estate. Basically, if the best way, one of the best ways I kind of describe it, if like you're flying into O'Hare or something and you see all those big industrial parks around the area, like they built and managed those. That's what he did now. But like, during, me growing up with him, he's done other things. Like, he used to manage commercial properties like malls around the Chicago area and that sort of thing. He did that for a while. And then also mostly commercial real estate stuff now too.
Nice.
But kind of going back to that thing, I just always knew I was going to move to New York. I wanted to be involved in fashion. But I didn't know how to do that because I'm from a small town. I had no idea. I would get Esquire and GQ, and I would see those, fashion spreads and get inspired, but I never knew that that could be a job or something like that. And then, funny enough, Project Runway came on, and I was like, oh my God, there's a school you can like learn about fashion. And this was junior year of high school. And
now you're talking about Parsons?
Yeah, exactly. So when I'm like, oh my God, like they did that. There's a thing out there. And I kind of changed courses and I was like, oh my God, like I can potentially go to school and do this. So, when I bring it up to my parents, they're like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that quite yet. One is because like you've been to New York once in your life for a family vacation. That doesn't really count as living.
Right.
There. Two, it's far away. It's a big city. Like you don't have any support network there. And three, like maybe it would be better if you went to someplace a bit closer, because I was still a bit of a homebody, even though I still had these big city aspirations. And they said, well, maybe you should find something a bit closer. So I ended up at Marquette. And what happened was like, okay, so I thought to myself, what would probably be the best way for me to get to Parsons or FIT? Either or. I was still trying to figure out that.
Sure. Yeah.
And for me, it's like I wanted to be involved in fashion, specifically menswear, because I just had that passion. Dad growing up, I actually had to wear a uniform basically every day of my life until college because I went to Catholic school growing up. And so we had to wear shirt and ties, that sort of thing. So I've just sort of always been in it. Maybe that's why, maybe there's some, psychoanalytic reasons why I chose this, but we won't get into that. And so, yeah, so I'm like, how do I get to New York? And I thought, well, for tailoring, what do I respect and what brands do I know of that, really embody the tailoring? And though there's English tailoring, right? But I was much more drawn to Italian, and as I learned, as I got more into it, there's different subsets of, Italian tailoring. So I was like, well, what I'll do then is I'll major in international business and I'll minor in Italian, because I thought that could be a good thing to have in your back pocket, because if I want to work in tailoring and I'm a fan of Italian tailoring, it might be good to understand the language.
Yeah, that's a lot of foresight. That's great.
So, and my mom's family's Italian, but we're a couple of generations in, so we don't really, not too many people speak it. And eventually, like sometimes my Italian relatives would come over. So I a little bit.
Phrases
And things like that, but nothing like well-versed or well-practiced or anything like that. So that's what I majored in. And I thought, that was the path forward. But then I realized I was actually terrible. I'm terrible at languages. In Spanish, I took Spanish in high school and had a terrible teacher. Just barely got by with that. And luckily for me, when I was taking Italian, I was so bad at it. I was just not good. But luckily for me, my teacher, she was Italian, but she also loved fashion. So basically, I got through that class is because I could basically talk to her about famous Italian fashion designers.
I was gonna say you're talking about
the
soft shoulder of a jacket.
Yeah, or even just designer. Even talking about Versace or Armani and that sort of stuff, and I could get away with not being a great student, technically learning the language or anything, because I can engage with her in a way that wasn't so academic. And so I think maybe I had a little bit, she was a little bit more sympathetic to me. It might not sound great, but I think I ended up with a B-, a very generous B-. But then I realized I'm not going to do international business because I had to do this for 2 more years, and I was like, this is not going to be it for me, because you had to have a language for international business, obviously, because English doesn't count, And so, okay, I'm like, all right, so this isn't going to work. I need to pivot. And so I was just talking to my guidance counselor, right? They're there for a reason to help you. And I said, look, this is my goal. This is what I want to do. I don't think international business is going to be able to do it, just because literally I won't be able to pass. And I'll be stuck here and it won't be great. And she goes, well, did you ever think about doing communications? And I was like, I didn't really think about that. And I was like, she's like, well, let's look into it. So we do a little research, and I also call up Parsons, what kind of people coming in this program, right? This fashion marketing program, what's their background? And they're like, well, it's usually people who have a professional career already that want to change, or a lot of them are in advertising, a lot of them are in public relations, that sort of thing. They have a communications background. So I was like, oh, well, this all kind of lines up. So if I need to get to New York, I'll switch a little bit and kind of go into the communication school. So I switched schools, went into communications, and basically it was kind of I kind of found my calling there. I had some really great professors who really nurtured me and gave me a lot of faith and invested in me, and they were always like, you know what, Nick, you're good with people. You like to tell stories, which is important in PR. You're a decent writer. You have to be able to write and have to be able to write effectively. And she's like, also, you're just, like I said ago, but you're just a very good people person, and that'll take you a long way. So I switched over, and I majored in communication studies, which funny, I can laugh about it. It's basically the major you get when you don't know what you want to do with your life. And I don't want to be disparaging about it, because what I learned there in that program has been instrumental to the success that I have now, which is, that was I graduated in 2010, so 9 years ago. But that was sort of the best I could do at the time, because I couldn't get into the PR program, the specific PR program. So I finished with a communications studies major and then a minor in public relations. And then I also thought it might be a good idea, I don't know why, but maybe it was more of an outlet for me, that I would do a fine arts minor. I didn't finish that because I had to stay an extra semester, and my whole goal was to get to New York. So I was like, I'll just not finish that. So
So what were you doing?
I was
it painting or photography?
Painting. It was a whole bunch of stuff. So drawing, painting, some photography work. But I just thought, if I'm going to New York and I'm working in an industry of aesthetics, it would be good for me to have some sort of background, or just be able to talk to it and be able to understand, things on an aesthetic level. And also I just, also from a cultural perspective as well. I mean, I love Milwaukee. I'm getting married in Milwaukee, so 'cause that's where I met my fiance, and we thought it'd be nice to go back and kind of have our moment there. And
That's awesome.
our first date was at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where we almost had our wedding, but we're not doing it there. We're going to another place that has a special place in our hearts. But there's culture there, but I also wanted to be able, if I was moving to a new city, which was this cultural bastion of everybody from around the world comes to New York, I wanted to make myself as worldly as possible, growing up in a small town in a very tight community in which there's not much diversity, and also going to Milwaukee and being a bit insulated from the the different people that are there, because I was on a college campus, and it's even though I went to a Jesuit school and they usually like to put themselves in neighborhoods that aren't, for lack of a better term, aren't like up and coming, that sort of thing, you were still very insulated. And I went to a place that wasn't very diverse either. So I thought, if I want to move to a city which is going to be diverse and it's going to be a whole new things that I'm never going to experience or see before, I might as well learn about things and try to expand my worldview. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So what were some of your first jobs out of college then?
Okay, so out of college, so basically graduated. Funny enough, I will kind of recant the story of when I found out when I got into Parsons. So I put in my, did my application, did all that, wrote your essays, that sort of thing. Was nervous, put into a couple places, had FIT and Parsons. Either or was going to be it, but just because I had, watched Project Runway, and I just, there was like Tim Gunn, and like my parents knew that, and then my kind of family knew that. There was like a reference point for them that I was like, all right, but Parsons is the place. And so put in my application, and then in March of the senior year, I got my acceptance letter. And, when you get your mail, and at the time, I was an RA in college for 3 years. So people always say we get bad reputations, and as you go through and be an RA, you get less and less strict kind of each year. Unless you don't, but you do, because you realize it's actually a stressful job, and you just kind of just make sure no one gets hurt.
Right.
Basically, should just be your job.
Sure.
So open up the mailbox, got the packet, was super excited, and all my residents at the time knew I was doing this, because I always try to keep close relationships with those guys, because I was on a floor of 35 freshmen in a building of 750 freshmen. So the building was belovedly called the beer can, because it was shaped as basically a cylinder, but also just because it's when you put 750 freshmen in tight, you're just in Milwaukee. Lovingly, it was referred to that way. I mean, also there's truth to it as well, but
I mean, their baseball team's called the Brewers.
yeah, I mean, everywhere you go, it's just around. And so I got the packet, and I'm looking at it, and my guys knew that I was waiting for this. I got it. They kind of gather around. I open it, and I kind of do happy dance. Put on cheesy enough. I put on, because that was the time when the Jay-Z Alicia Keys song came out from
New York,
right?
Yeah, sure.
And so I was like, oh, this is fitting. So I just blasted that, and we all just kind of had a mini dance party to celebrate me getting into Parsons. So kind of go back to your original question. Sorry to kind of go off topic, but
No, it's all good.
so after I graduated, I moved to New York. So I worked in Milwaukee for 3 months. I worked in the Res Life doing conferences, because during the summer they shut down the dorms, but a big part of business is having conferences come to the university in Milwaukee, and having university housing is a very effective and nice way to make some money for the university during the summer. So I basically ran their conference services for the summer, basically just making sure everyone had beds and they could stay and whatnot. In August, my parents and I loaded up the Suburban and drove from McHenry to New York and moved me into the residence hall. And so for my Parsons program, it was a 2-year program. But, education nowadays is very expensive. And I thought to myself, well, can I do this in 1 year? And so I asked them, and they're like, well, sure. They're like, you're going to have to take a lot of classes, but we can also transfer over some of your other classes too. And that was also one reason why I took communications classes and some art classes at Marquette is because I could transfer them over. Because I, trying to think ahead.
I see a trend actually.
So just trying to put myself in the best position where I can succeed in a way. So they're like, sure, you can do it, but like you got to take like 9 classes. And I was like, well, okay, that seems like a lot. But I did. But also interning at the same time. Because the reason why I came to Parsons too is just because of the networking opportunities. So I had moved to New York and I didn't know anybody. I knew one person, but he was like a friend. He was the son of one of my dad's coworkers who moved to New York years ago, and he was working for Donna Karan, but he went to the same program that I went to at Parsons. So he was kind of a mentor along the ways, but I kind of came here not knowing anybody. And also that was one reason why I went to Parsons as well, is because I always thought I can go to Parsons. I can use that to build a network of people because it's so linked into all these,
it's a small world.
It's a small world.
Yeah.
I can use it to build a network, and I can use it to get an education. And no one can take an education away from you. That's one thing my parents always, instilled in me was like, for them, education was extremely important. And so they're like, no one can take that away from you. And I also thought to myself, I'll get an education, and then if I'm here for a year and it doesn't work out, I'll go back to Chicago, and a Parsons on your resume looks great. Like I'll be like, I thought, I'll be like a celebrity or some sort of thing. Like people really want that because it resonates really, resonates.
It's on TV.
Yeah, it's on TV and it's very well respected.
Sure.
So did my classes. First internship I did was at DKNY. And this is a very cool story because, like I said, I'm from a very small town, didn't have a lot of exposure to these things, but you have these dreams of these sort of things. And first week I moved to New York. There's an internship fair at Parsons. Go to the internship fair, get an interview at DKNY. And for me, like, that's a very iconic brand, very, because, it's Donna Karan, it's New York.
Sure.
Being from like a Midwest thing, that was like something that you knew of, right? And have an interview, get an internship in their marketing department. And they're like, how soon can you start? This was like a 1 week sort of thing. I was like, well, like I have like 3 or 4 days before school starts, like let's just do right away. And they're like, great, we need you to work the Donna Karan fashion show. And I was like, what? They're like, yeah, like, her, like fashion show. And I was like, you serious? And they're like, yeah. And so like my first like week, or second week, it should be the second week here. I, small town Nick, get to go to Donna Karan's, studio over in the West Village to basically like work backstage, making sure, just doing whatever. And I was like, oh my God, like, how does this happen?
It's just in the mix.
It was like basically like living a dream, like what I've worked so hard for as like a 19-year-old. Like you work hard, but like you're 19. So, you have safety nets around you and things like that. But being able to go and work Donna Karan's fashion show as like your first New York City experience, it just gave you like, I'm like, how do I top this? And it was I was just in awe. I mean, sure, it was hard work and you're running around and you're getting yelled at and all that sort of stuff, but like, I didn't care. Like
right.
I was there.
Yeah.
Like I was like getting to see the show. Like I'm backstage. Like I'm like making sure like models are lined up correctly. I'm like, making sure that they look nice. Like I'm grabbing someone a water if they need it. Like I didn't care anything. I was going to do it.
That's also having youth on your side.
That's also having youth on your side, and like they can just tell you what to do, right? And so that was very cool. So being able to do that basically my second week in New York, having just a moment like that was like I still pinch myself, like I said, 9 years later that I had that moment. And I've been very fortuitous because from that moment on until now, I've always had I've been very fortunate to have moments of like where I still like feel like I get to pinch myself because like I'm in this, I get to do this very cool thing, and not many people get to have the opportunity to do it. And I never like to take, that for granted because I can, I get to do these things that are just so cool. And so that internship ended, and I was like, all right, I need to find a new thing. And, that was marketing. but I didn't really do too many marketing stuff. It was more like, just doing reports and things like that. And I was like, I needed to find myself an internship where I could be more hands-on. And a internship at Brooks Brothers came on the internship board, got the internship, and then I worked there for probably about 9 months as an intern, and then eventually sort of as an assistant. And my boss there, Dana Schiller, I love Dana. I still text with her. She was very instrumental. If there's one thread that we'll kind of get through, I'm always aware of the people that have helped me along the way, and they've always shaped me to kind of who I am today. And she's one of those people that really kind of invested in me and saw my potential and made sure that I was in positions to succeed, and also to make sure to introduce me to people, not as just like Nick's our intern, but this is Nick, he's part of the team. So when I'm doing market appointments, or if I'm doing a press preview and that sort of thing, like, if I'm talking to an editor at GQ, like, I wasn't the intern, right? I was Nick, and I was part of the team.
You were a contributor.
I was a contributor. And so I did my internship at Brooks Brothers, and I loved it, because I was like, for me, it was a very exciting time, because we had a lot of projects we had worked on there. It's when Tom Brown was still doing Black Fleece, so I got to meet Tom Brown when he was there, which was like, I was like in an elevator with Tom Brown, and I was like, oh my God, like, what is my life?
That's awesome.
This sort of thing. I got to help out with Great Gatsby when they did the costumes for The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of like costume research, which was very cool to do, because Brooks Brothers also has a very extensive archives just because of their history.
Yeah, their age, yeah.
Knowing all that sort of stuff. I got to work on which I think is one of the best events ever, no matter what it is the St. Jude Christmas party event that they host every year, where they have, Broadway, shows come in and perform. Wynton Marsalis comes in. It's like the best event I think, just ever, just for how much money they raise and the people and the spirit that has. I was very fortunate to get some really cool opportunities, and I'll tell you one of my favorite stories while I was working at Brooks Brothers. So I'm a huge Stephen Colbert fan. Every night I'd watch it, and it was always a thing that my dad and I would discuss too, because he would watch it as well, when it was a Colbert show.
Right.
And so this was right around the time when the royal wedding was happening. And Stephen Colbert show, did a series because Stephen was expecting to get an invitation to the royal wedding, but he needs to learn how the proper mannerisms for a royal wedding.
Right.
And so he does a 3-part series where he has like a royal expert, and like he learns like the proper way to have tea and all this sort of different
the etiquette
things.
classes.
Yeah, and but in Colbert fashion, right? It's parody, right? So one of the episodes is he needs to learn how to dress appropriately. And there's not too many places where you can find full-on morning suit. Not like a morning, not like because you're sad, but
right.
Formality morning suit,
dress, yeah,
morning dress, anywhere except perhaps Ralph Lauren and Brooks Brothers. And Brooks dressed Stephen for the show. We were going to film a segment of the show in the store with Stephen getting properly kitted out for his morning attire, morning dress. And so I was there that day doing being kind of not running the show, but because they had their producer, but I was the PR guy there, because there's always someone who has to be around, sort of thing. For me, it was a huge moment because I was a huge Colbert fan.
Sure.
And being there on the first floor with Steven and having him go through the whole hilariousness of the situation. And being upstairs, getting him tailored, and him just walking around the 5th floor, in a tuxedo shirt and his boxers, and playing pool, and being able to do that was just one of the coolest things that I'll never forget that. So after it happened, I just called my dad. I was like, "You never guess what I did." And
he was in his boxers.
Yeah, and it was just it was funny, and it was just a moment where I was those was one of the moments I was a 22-year-old being damn, I was just here hanging with Stephen Colbert. So at Brooks Brothers, I was open to a lot of those really cool opportunities to do those sort of things, because they, we did a whole Mad Men collection. So having Janie Bryant come by and do a whole event like that, because I was a huge Mad Men am still a huge Mad Men fan. That was another just sort of seminal thing that sort of got me into fashion as well, because the clothing and that's very impactful.
Absolutely. So those were internships, right?
Those were internships.
So you were still in school?
I was still in school.
So then what was your first job out of school?
So my first job out of school is I got it through working at Brooks Brothers. They have at the time they had a PR agency called HWPR. And so Paul Lerner is another one of those people that have had a very impactful. He's just such a professional. I have such respect for what he does. Paul was looking for a new assistant. He needed somebody who was young, green, as he said, that, also cheap, right? That sort of thing, that could come in and like just do a good job. And I had known him because that was the agency that Brooks Brothers used. So I had that connection. But I kind of want to, before I kind of get into that, I kind of want to go back because this was like, I feel like a bit of a classic New York story. So once I finished school, basically I had a month to find a job, right? You finish school. I thought I had something lined up. It kind of fell through. So I kind of was in a bit of a tough, sticky situation. Living in New York is expensive, especially like when you don't have a full-time job. And so basically I kind of had enough money saved up for a month after I had, depleted all my funds of going to school and that sort of thing. And
so the clock is ticking.
So clock is ticking. So I basically had a month to find a job. So finished school, moved apartments, because that sort of thing. And that's where HWPR came in. That became my first job, because basically the third week into my 4 weeks is like when I got the interview, and then like a couple of days later I got the job. So
that's incredible, because like a lot of interviews and the time in which it takes to get a job can be months.
Yeah.
And you've been like getting things like, when
Yes.
can you start?
Yeah.
You're getting a job in 3 days.
And like I said, don't like to take things for granted. I've been very fortunate to have these things. I think a bit of it goes into you try the best to set yourself up for success in the best way possible, and then then it's out of your hands.
Throw caution to the wind, yeah.
And then it's out of your hands because, it takes two. Like someone's got to hire you and that sort of thing. But so luckily for me, like I was down on the wire, but I got the job. So I was like, I can stay in New York, because if I didn't,
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm out of money. Like I got to move back home. That's just the way it is. And like I had set myself up for that possibility. I wasn't going to be disappointed because, nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Right.
I moved out here. I had a dream. If I didn't do it, if I didn't get it, then it doesn't mean it's the end. It's just another thing I have to think about to try to get back out here. So luckily for me, it turned out and it worked out okay.
Yeah.
So first job, HWPR. Paul Lerner, like I said, mentor. I respect him so much. Really showed me what it was to be a good publicist. Just level of professionalism that a lot of times PR people can get a bad rap for being, difficult, or, sometimes it's about them, or sometimes, they don't make it, just making other people's lives difficult because they have to protect the brand in a certain way. But, Paul always showed me that, your job is like the conduit of information, right? So it's your job to take what your brand has and then put that out into the bigger world. And you're not there to be a hindrance for journalists. You're not there necessarily to say no. You're there to say no to things that aren't right, but you're there to be a resource for journalists and editors. So because you have to work together with them in order to get your end result, which is good press for your client, instead of trying to be difficult in that sort of way. I always like to say you catch more, flies with, honey than vinegar. So, and that's sort of a bit of an approach that I take to my my professional career as well. But HWPR, 2.5 years. And that's what kind of got me into the watch industry. So that's the kind of transition. So I didn't grow up with watches. Watches weren't a thing that were, part of my family. I wore like a Timex that I got from Target, that sort of thing, just because I wanted to know the time. And, I didn't have a fancy phone. I didn't get, an iPhone until my first job here in New York City. I just had a flip phone, that sort of thing. So, and Paul is like the watch PR guy, right? He, at the time when I started with him, he still has Audemars Piguet, Harry Winston, FP Journe. So these were all brands, like heavy hitter brands. And these were all things that I had no clue about. You know, I saw them in magazines, but I just had no idea. So Paul, I got very quickly introduced to a world that I had no idea about. Like I knew suits because it's a little bit easier to cut into. You see them more often, and then also being at Brooks Brothers. But watches was something I had no idea about. So then I started working with Paul on all the watch accounts. And then I just started learning more and more, and that's kind of how I got my foray into watches, just because he was the watch PR guy. And being able, and like I have crazy stories about watches too, because like there are times where like I'd be like going home and like all the watches are insured, but it's kind of like I'd have to go to a set, pick up the watch and like bring him to the vault, and I'd be like on a subway and I'd have like
$1 million worth of watches. Yeah.
Worth of watches, just like in my, you know, at the time, like Phil's a briefcase because everyone, you know, hashtag menswear. I grew up in the time where you had all those blogs, and so like you had like,
I was one of them.
Yeah, so like you had like, you know, you had like Michael Williams had a continuous lean, and like you had oh my God, you know, so like how to talk to girls at parties, like Lawrence and that sort of stuff. Like you grew up, you had, you know, sartorialist too. I mean, he's still doing his thing, Scott. And
yeah,
I grew up in that moment of all those things that were there. And so that's how I got in the watches. And so I was there for 2.5 years, working on watches, really learning the business. Paul was also very important in the fact that he gave me responsibility very early on to kind of run with brands, not those other ones, like those are his things, but as an agency, like you're looking to build your client base, right? And so I was fortunate to work with some brands, and one I work with till today, so that relationship's 9 years, which is Autodromo, so Bradley Price at Autodromo.
Sure.
You know, I was very fortunate to work with him very early on when he just started his business, and Paul gave me the challenge and the responsibility to help, you know, guide that and be a good, you know, person to work on that account. So I really appreciated that aspect. But 2.5 years was there, and I just got to a point where I thought, you know, I've learned a lot. It's time for me to move on. And I was very fortunate that I had made, you know, good connections with the industry editors and that sort of thing. And I got an email one day from Ted Stafford, who was at GQ at the time, now is at Men's Health. And he goes, would you be interested in meeting with Jory at Ermenegildo Zegna? Because they have a PR position, a manager position opening. And I was like, heck yes. Like, I'm going to do that, because I thought that was the next step for me in my professional career, and it was menswear centric, because that's
and a major really brand.
It's a $1 billion business.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the names in menswear, right? The respected names. And so I kind of was at a point where I was like, this is the right moment for me. You know, I kind of hit my peak at where I was at, and it was a very small agency, and I was like working on a whole bunch of accounts besides watches. Like I was doing like maternity wear, like not my wheelhouse.
Not hashtag menswear.
Not hashtag menswear. Like not my wheelhouse. I apologize. I probably wasn't your best ambassador for that, but no, we eventually got like Kate Middleton to wear it. So it came out. That was like the win, right? Like Kate Middleton wore it. So, and then I worked in a lingerie brand, and so like things that weren't I just had no interest, and I think it's very important. If you're in PR, especially, and you have to be passionate about the brands and the products that you're representing. And for me, I was a product person. Like I love the intricacies of things. I love how things are made, and so it made sense for me like to kind of go to Zegna too, because it just had such a reputation of, you know, quality and craftsmanship.
Yeah, I mean their fabrics are like world renowned.
Exactly. And so when interviewed there, got the job.
Within days.
Not within days. It took like 2 weeks. It was a couple weeks. I like hired on the spot. No, wasn't hired on the spot, but went interviewed, got the job. I remember the day I went to interview. And I think everyone who has to go and interview another job is always worried about like their appearance, going in for the day.
Well, and especially for Xenia.
Yeah. And, but also like going back to your employee at the time or your employer at the time.
Oh, right.
Because you have to figure out the excuse and all that sort of stuff. I had to wear a suit that day, and I'm like, I can't go back to the office in a suit because Paul's he's gonna know. So there's a hotel right by the office. So I was like, I'll just use the bathroom there to change clothes. I go change but I'm so nervous and so frazzled. I thought I get out of the stall and I go to wash my hands, and there's like a lady right next to me. She's like, I think you're in the wrong bathroom. So I was so frazzled.
You walked in the women's room.
I went into the women's room and changed clothes. No one was like, she was the only one. Like, there's one other person in there, but like, I didn't see anything. But I was just so frazzled, and I was just like, thanks, like my mistake. She's like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. So that happened. Fast forward, got the job at Xenia. Loved it just because I was just such a fan. Like that, like being able to like work for a brand that you admire. I think is, it's not really a job at that point. And I know that seems like sort of like, kind of like, cheesy to say, but like I felt like I was like really in my element. So I was PR manager for a little bit over a year. And then I actually just switched careers a little bit, but still at Xenia. I decided, I always kind of joked I was really good at spending the money, but never understood like how we made the money. So I moved over to wholesale and worked on the wholesale side and was an account executive there for the sartorial side, not the sportswear side. And my client, the brands that I worked with were Barney's, Nordstrom, and Bergdorf Goodman. Basically, my job was like, I was just like tracking sales of ties and like trying to move inventory around to make sure I could capitalize on sales and that sort of thing. But I thought it was a good move for me because I was still young enough in my career that I thought, I have my PR background, I have my network, right? But if I want to maybe do something different, or if I want to be a better, well-rounded professional, I should maybe do this because this is like the business side of it, right?
Sure.
So I was like, let me go here and learn some skills. So I learned wholesale and PR, totally two entirely different things. But, I learned all these, like markdown allowances and like all the terminology you hear when you're talking retail. So like I can talk. And also I thought to myself, be like, sometimes like when you're having conversations with people that aren't in the PR world, you need to be able to be on their level and kind of show them why you are necessary. Like, right, you have to prove why you're necessary. And so I could be like, look, like we did this campaign, it generated X amount. Like, obviously you can track everything now and it's much better understanding of like where sales come from and things like that. So did that for a year. But then I just, I realized to myself, like, that wasn't my passion. I was not someone who I wasn't going to be someone who I could just sit in a corner and look at spreadsheets all day. Because what that really showed to me, which was, I had this idea of what I thought a wholesale was. I thought this was like, part of it is selling the collection, right? Part of it is being in the showroom. Because like I said, I'm a product person. I love being around the clothes, talking about them, what makes them cool, what makes them unique. But like, I loved telling the stories about the clothes. But then I realized I only did that like a couple times a year. And then the rest of the year was like figuring out, like just staring at spreadsheets. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to reach out to some people, reach out to some editors, that sort of thing, and just kind of tell them, update my resume, and just kind of tell them that, I'm looking to get back into public relations. And if they, like, it's a no rush thing. I'll email some agencies that I know of. I'll email some of my editor friends and just to have it on their radar. And luckily for me, couple things popped up. I have a couple interviews, right, at some agencies. And for me, it was kind of like, it's always easier to get a job when you have a job. So there's not really like, I don't really have any pressure. So
sure,
I wasn't like in a huge rush to leave it, right? Because I was in a comfortable position, being in New York, I was making good money, that sort of thing. I was still with the brand that I really respected and loved, but it was just more of like a personal thing. It's just like, this I know is not what I wanted to do. So just sitting at my desk one day, I get an email from Michael Williams from Continuous Lean. Paul Williams has his own agency. He's like, hey, Nick, hope you're doing well. I hear you're looking to make a switch. Would you want to have a conversation? I was like, sure. And kind of going back to that hashtag menswear thing, like Michael is like is the guy. Like for me, at least, like when I was, I mean, like reason why, like, I mean, it sounds like reason why I bought like Filson, reason why like I knew about Red Wing, like reason why like I knew about these things was because like I read it continuously, in college, and like that gave me like reference points for things to like understand about whether it was like taste or whether it was product or was there a thing that like it gave me a path to kind of go down in order to refine my own likes and things like that. Went in, had the interview, and went great. Got a email from Michael being like, we'd love to have you on board. Would you accept a job offer? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So left Xenia, moved over to Paul & Williams. So working with Michael, working down here in Soho. And I'm ecstatic because like I'm back into PR. And it's also the client roster is kind of more, it's in my wheelhouse, right? It's that menswear stuff. It's like what I'm passionate about. We had some big clients there, like Levi's and Patagonia and that sort of stuff. And I, for me, I was more working on kind of like everybody else who weren't those two, right? Because we had a big team and they required a lot, but you have also other clients too and things like that. And I think kind of like my specialty or like what I was really passionate about was like, working with brands and trying to like help build them, right?
So people can understand, because I think a lot of times PR is misunderstood by people. So can you just touch on what exactly you do, like
Sure.
in this role?
That's a great question. I try to figure that out myself. It's an ever-evolving role. So, I mean, at its core, like public relations is like the representation of a company to like the external public, right? At its core, that's like, if you look up the definition of it, that's kind of what it is. And there's like different facets that make up that sort of bubble idea of what public relations is. And over the past couple of years or several years, like that idea has changed, right? Because we have Instagram. I mean, that changed a lot of stuff.
Just other ways of reaching people.
Just other ways of reaching people. So social media, exactly. So basically, kind of like the best way I describe my job is like I kind of take the cool stuff that you're doing. I connect that cool stuff to editors who I know who will have an interest in this. And since I've been working with a lot of these people for a while, I have a better understanding, or I have a good understanding of what they would like. And I work with the journalist and my brand to create or produce a story in which it highlights the brand in a positive light. So basically, taking an idea, finding an editor, working with them on a story, having them publish it, and that story is then educates a greater audience. It's kind of like the stepping stone of how that works. I mean, it's different now because brands a lot of times have their own communication channels. That's kind of like the old way of doing it, right? Calling somebody up, sending a press release, getting it printed. Nowadays, brands have their own ways of communicating with their, with their demographics, with their customers, with people who aren't their customers. So PR has to evolve with that and try to find its place, because it's not just calling up people anymore. But I do think there is a place for being a person who is a good resource for telling stories. And that's kind of how I try to see myself, as a person who's a good resource for journalists who want to tell cool stories. So
cool.
That's kind of my view on PR. I mean, there's other things that go into it, like, there's event planning, there's social media, there's...
What's really cool is the relationship aspect, right? Like you have to have a relationship with the brand, but you're also needing these relationships with the editors.
Yes.
And it's not just about throwing parties. Like a lot of people think PR is just, oh yeah, all you do is party every weekend.
Sure, there are parties. I mean, personally, they're fun, but I would kind of just rather go home at the end of the day and like hang out and watch some TV and that sort of thing, because you've already worked a full day and then you got to go, work even later. But that's part of it, and like that goes in the mix, right? That goes into the mix of trying to generate energy, publicity, right, to create greater awareness around the brand that you're working with.
Absolutely. So then you're with Williams.
So I'm with Paul & Williams 2.5 years. I learned a lot. Michael was very important to me in the fact that he gave me license, right? There's a lot of times bosses who like micromanage, or like you you don't learn things. But Michael, for me, was like, Nick, you're an adult. You're good at your job. Like, just do it. Like, just do it. Like, you need to have the confidence in yourself to be able to know that you're making the right decision on these things.
That's got to make you feel like $1 million.
So he was very important, the fact that he was just like, you know what, Nick, like, you're good at your job. You're a professional. I wouldn't have hired you if you weren't good. So just like just do your damn job, and like, you're going to be fine, and have confidence in the fact that you're good at it. Was there for 2.5 years, got to work on, that's where I kind of came into my own and was able to work on the brands that I was like really passionate about. Like I said, because I'm a product guy first, I like sort of things. So that's when I started working with, Drake's. And that's when I started working with Ring Jacket. And that started when I started working with The Armory, brands of that nature. That's when I started working with Rowing Blazers.
It was all under Michael.
Yeah, it was all when I was working with Michael.
Are you a watch collector but having trouble finding something cool and unique? I mean, the last thing you really want is what everyone else has, right? Well, this is where my friend and former Standard H podcast guest Tim Jackson comes in. He and his wife Jana own Passion Fine Jewelry in Solana Beach, California, where you'll find an incredible assortment of independent watches waiting for you in their shop and online. And if you're getting engaged, have an anniversary coming up, or simply have another reason to buy jewelry, they have you covered. Passion Fine Jewelry also employs a goldsmith on staff for any custom desires, so you're able to go that route if you so choose. Visit Passion Fine Jewelry when you find yourself in Southern California, but they're also open 24 hours a day at passionfinejewelry.com. You can also find a wealth of information through Tim's blog, independentintime.com, where he covers anything independent watchmaking related, among a plethora of other information, so check that out as well. I've really enjoyed creating these podcasts on behalf of Standard H and sharing each of these personal stories with all of you. We each have goals, and it's the entrepreneurial spirit that inspired me to start the company. You can further support the brand and the podcast by visiting standard-h.com to pick up your choice of merchandise, and as always, thank you for listening. Lastly, if you have a moment, please rate and review the show. It makes a tremendous difference in keeping these things going. And now back to my conversation with Nick. So this is kind of the second time where you've talked about working with people that you now work with under your own label.
Yes.
So are there just not any sort of things known as a non-compete clause? How does that happen? How do you take clients that you bring on and then remove them from said business?
Sure. I always had this idea in my mind that I wanted to do my own thing. But then I kind of thought and looked back to myself and I was like, you're not doing that. Like, you weren't necessarily progressing on how you want personally and professionally how to do. And I always had this dream to have my own agency. And I remember the first time that, when I interviewed with Michael for my job, he goes, well, what do you want to do with your life? Like, what do you see yourself doing? And I said, well, there's two things. I said, one is have my own agency, and the other is become president of the United States. And I said, I think one of them is actually easier now than the other. Sorry, political comment. And also, constitutionally, I'm not 35, so I can't run. So I was like, well, then I guess I'll have to start my own agency. So I had an opportunity presented to me that I just couldn't pass up. So my relationship with Hodinkee has been a long one. So I've known them 9 years, just because of my thing in the business. And one of my great friends, Stephen Pulverant, the first time we met, and I know this is going to sound like a ridiculous story, but I showed him 2 $1 million grinding complications from Audemars Piguet. And I was like, we're like 23 years old, 22, and we're like, what the heck is this, right? So, and I just always had this long history with them. And so kind of when I was thinking about what I want my business to be, I kind of thought that Hodinkee would be a good partner to start this with because I had such a long history with them.
And you've seen them grow.
And I've seen them grow. And I've kind of been in it from a distance, but I still had this connection to the people in the business because I was friends with them, right?
Sure.
So opportunity presents itself. I come into Hodinkee. I literally pitched them the idea of my agency. And they're like, great, we'll be your first client.
That's awesome.
And at that moment, I quit my job and, started the business. And so that was last November. And then I officially launched Lawrence & Company, which is my one-man agency. It looks bigger because of the internet. But
how did you come up with the name? Why Lawrence?
So Lawrence is my middle name.
I figured.
A lot of PR agencies are named after their founders, but I wanted like a low-key way to do that.
Right.
So like if you don't know me really well, you don't know my middle name's Lawrence. So that was just kind of like a little way around. Number 2, it was my grandfather's name. So it's a bit of, honoring him. And 3, I just thought it sounded kind of fancy. Like, it sounds nice. It sounds like, Lawrence, they like must have nice stuff. So I kind of thought like.
It's one of those old names that like still stands the test of time.
Sure,
but
yeah.
it's like a traditional, it sounds like menswear.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it kind of ticked those 3 boxes. Like I wanted something with my name, but didn't want to be so obvious. I wanted something to kind of, to honor my grandfather. And then I just thought I wanted something that sounded like nice.
Yeah,
so
sure.
It wouldn't have been like
if you named it Larry, like
yeah, I mean like Larry and Co. I mean that's kind of fun, but like it doesn't have the same ring to it. I work with all these luxury products, so I kind of had to. If I build my like on my website, I want the brands that I work with to be proud and be a partner of a brand that they think will be successful and represents them in a right way. And
sure,
a lot of that has to do with the name and the image that you project out to the world.
So what are some of those brands?
So I work with Hodinkee, Drake's, Ring Jacket, The Armory, Autodromo Watches, and Stofa. So all very menswear. I get that. That's my wheelhouse. I understand. But all I think have very unique value propositions in what they do, and all things that I myself am very interested in. So, because I think that is extremely important to what I do, because I can literally come into the office any day and like I know I'm working on things that like I personally like,
that you care about.
Yeah, that I care about.
Yeah. So you're based out of the Hodinkee office. We're sitting in the Hodinkee offices.
Yes.
Now, how does that work? Where you can do you rent your space here, or is it because you're in house, obviously?
Okay. Well, you can get. So I'm literally in the house. Hodinkee is nice enough to let me sit here. They basically let me run my business out of here. So
that's incredible.
I'm just gonna, if I can be a value add in any sort of way of just being able to sit at my desk here in the office,
right?
Whether that's you see a wrist shot on the internet, a lot of times that's me, like that's my wrist because I need to shoot something, or if like somebody needs something else, like I can be here and be an asset to the company in a way that I think would be a little bit different than having my own office. Eventually I'm going to get there, right? I'm just 1 year in business and I'm just, So
you and James have a very close working relationship with your hand in your left pocket.
So yeah, exactly. So yeah, I got I'm trying to invent some new ways, some new poses you can get a watch photograph, but we'll see. There's only so many ways you can do it. But eventually, there's obviously a plan for this business. Like I said, just 1 year in, but I kind of thought like, what would be the best way for me to do this? And like, literally, like, how can I have the least amount of overhead as possible? When you're a new business, it's like, how do you cut down expenses?
Right.
I literally, I have very few. I'm just one person.
And usually rent is the biggest.
So,
and you got that taken care of.
And Hodinkee, yeah, they let me, they're so kind to let me, bother them for 5 days of the week. So
that's amazing. How does your approach change based on the client you're working with? Like a Stofa is a totally different business than Hodinkee.
Sure, it is. And also businesses have different needs, right? So you have to kind of have an understanding of what they want, essentially. And then how do you build a plan around them to make that successful? So Hodinkee is a much larger scale. And kind of when I first started with them, one of the big things that we had kind of talked about is there had been a bit of a lull in potentially like fashion coverage, right? So as Hodinkee grows, it itself is it's an editorial, like it's a media company, right? First and foremost, it's a media company, but we also sell products. So as the product side grows, right, you have to be able to support that in a way, right? And so one of the big things for us this year was like, how do we get more coverage on the products that we launch? And how do we let more people know about it? And because if you're on Hodinkee and you're a Hodinkee fan, you follow all the channels, you're aware of all the things that are happening, right?
Sure.
But what about everybody else? Like, how do we figure out other people who can kind of listen to us? So kind of one of the big things for this year was for me is like, I need to start working on trying to get Hodinkee more editorial coverage as a product, sort of a fashion thing, right? So one thing I think we've been really successful with this year is being able to develop relationships with, outlets that aren't Hodinkee, who will then write about the products that we produce. I mean, a lot of them are in the same sort of vein. So if you follow one, you might follow other. But like, for example, like Hypebeast has written about us a lot, which I think is kind of neat in a sense that we're opening up a kind of like a whole other avenue for potential people who appreciate watches. I'm not saying you need to buy them, but
absolutely,
maybe there's something that they think that we did something that's cool, and that's like or Highsnobiety, for example. They've done some stuff that we've done over the year that we've written about, and kind of putting watches in a context that's not necessarily so. What's the word I'm trying to look for?
Pretentious.
Exactly. Like, I mean, it is a, you don't necessarily need a watch, right? You can look at your phone. You can have other different ways to tell time. You don't need to spend a lot of money on a watch if you want one. But, it's not necessarily about that. It's trying to talk about getting watches into a kind of like a greater context that it's just not the same people that we talk to all the time. So that's where I think we've had some success of talking to like, the Highsnobieties and like the Hypebeasts of the world, is because, sure, that's more streetwear, but they also appreciate things that are well made and that are made with thought and craft and have a story behind it too. So even though watches can be pigeonholed into this thing, I've been trying to try to put it out into a larger context. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because, the focus on watches changes depending on who you are, what your budget is, all the rest of these things, and what the perception is. You don't look at Swatch usually with the same, eye that you would look at, say, Patek.
Sure.
With.
Sure.
I mean, that communication obviously has to change.
Yeah. And, but for me, it's just like, I literally worn a Swatch every day except so I just bought a new watch for myself, just a little anniversary gift for myself. But I literally have been wearing the same Swatch for 2 years. And I work in this world, and it's just like I go to events and things like that, and people are like,
which Swatch was it?
Swatch Skin.
Okay.
Yeah, the mesh bracelet, silver dial.
So not the System 51?
No. I bought this before I even, was in my job here with Hodinkee. I wore that every single day. And it'd always be cool. I could go to an event and people would be like, oh, what are you wearing? And they'd be like flexing, like whatever. And I'd be like, yeah, I got my Swatch. And I'd be like, I'm totally cool with it. So,
how do you think social media plays? I mean, you touched on it a little bit. Like, how do you think that plays a role for you? I mean, that's got to be a major component.
So,
or is it not?
In my day-to-day activities, it's not a huge component.
Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you why. It's more of a huge component in terms of the brand side, right? Creating that narrative, that message, and I'll work on that stuff too. But for when I'm doing external things to talking to the editors of the world, the social media aspect doesn't really play too much into that.
Okay.
So I think eventually what Lawrence and company will become, that'll become a more important part of the business.
You'll have a social media person.
There'll be as the plan sort of develops and the company grows. I'm planning on building out other avenues just because I think you have to be able to add value always, because it's just such a competitive landscape and the landscape's always changing. You have to be able to offer your clients just more than what you just say you can do, because it's a tough place right now in terms of how media evolves, how consumers are evolving, how people are buying things. So I'm always a big proponent of, you can't just do one thing. You could be really good at, but you have to always have another thing that you can add and bring to the table for your clients. So.
Yeah. Well, I would say, by the way, congratulations on the 1-year anniversary last month.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah,
so you went from 0 clients more or less to, what, 7 now?
Yeah.
7, 8, something like that?
Yeah. So, no, I've been very lucky to kind of touch on, you had asked me that original question about the non-compete, and, I can kind of touch on that a little bit. So when I left Paul & Williams, I I brought auto drumming with me because Bradley and I had known each other for 8 years, and that made sense. And then I had Hodinkee, which is an external client, and then I also brought on another brand called Amay Leon Dor. Beautiful store. If you're around, check it out on Mulberry Street. Really cool stuff. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to launch something that was kind of my own. I didn't want it to look like I took people, like I poached them and like pulled them away.
Right.
So when I launched the company, I started with 3 brands. 2 I had very personal relationships with just because of my history with them, and then 1 which was an external thing that I went out and got, right? I can't say I got it personally because I know someone who worked there. Everything is all about who you know, right? So
sure,
they started with me, so I started with the 3, and then my whole thought process around this is like those clients that I had been working with at Paul & Williams, and who weren't with me at the time when I launched. I said, well, let me do this. I'm not gonna go and like try to poach them, right? The way that I'm gonna do my business is that I'm going to do a good job for the clients that I have. And then if those clients are happy with where they're at currently, then like I'm all for that. Like if you want to stay there and you are getting what you want, it's capitalism, it's competition, it's the free market. That's the way it is. But if you don't, or if you want to change, like you know where to find me. Like you have my email. And that's the way I kind of went about it, which I thought was the right way. I try, I'm not a confrontational person. I try to be as nice as I can. When I left, I tried to do it in the way that I thought was the best way that I could. And if it wasn't, then at least like I go to sleep at night knowing that I tried my best to do it in a way that I thought was like, ethical and the right way to do it.
Sure.
So,
no, absolutely. What's sort of been the hardest part for you?
Wow. Oh, so yeah, 1 year in, I think the hardest part for me, it's the long term, right? It's trying to figure out, because I have like a wheelhouse of like what I'm really good at.
And what do you consider that to be?
Well, like I think like, I'm really good. Like I get stories. I know the editors. Like I can play stuff.
So you're well connected.
I'm well connected, and like I also, like I said, like I like to bring good stories to people. Like that's what I think I'm really good. I'm really good at taking things and kind of putting them together in like a nice, package and sending it to you and be like, this is why it's cool, and I think this is why like your readers will like it. I try to do the job of an editor before it actually gets to the job of the editor, just to make their job easier. But I don't think that business model will sustain, or it can be a part of something, but it can't be the end all be all of a business. And so the challenge for me right now is, since I have, 5, 6, 7, sort of influx clients, is you do your day-to-day work and then you do your future work for them. But then you also have to think about what your business is going to look like and how they're going to play a part in what you're trying to do going forward. So the hardest part for me is like you get not bogged down, you do your day-to-day stuff, but what time do you actually have to sit down and think about like, all right, like what's the next thing I should do? Should like I hire an assistant? Like I'm one person. Do I hire an assistant? Does that make sense? For me, no, that doesn't make sense. Like I don't need somebody who can come in and like just do reports and answer emails and traffic samples, things like that. For me, it's like I need somebody who's like an account executive who can like run with things, and like
right.
that would make more sense, money better spent. So then I can go out and try to grow the business to add that next piece of the puzzle. So that's what I find the most challenging is you have your day-to-day work, but finding the time to reflect on what this thing needs to be in order to be successful. So I'm technically like, I know it seems like I'm like never not working, because like when I do my 9 to 6, 9 to 6:30, 9 to 7 here at Hodinkee, but then post that I'm either, out with an editor, just hanging out. A lot of these editors are my friends anyway, so it's more like I just, I'm lucky to the fact that they're my friends, so we can just hang out. Or I'm thinking about like, okay, that's that, but I'm also like my own accountant, and I'm also my own, if you're chasing bills or you're doing like that, like doing all your expenses, like doing all that stuff too. So I think the hardest part is like being able to figure out the time it takes you need to do your day-to-day job and do it really well, but giving yourself time and space to think about what you want your business to be, while also at the same time trying to have a life.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
So what's been easy for you?
I think what's been easy for me is having, and I don't mean this to sound cheesy or anything like that, is just having like the complete faith of the brands that I work with, to know that I am doing everything on my side to get them what they want. So I've been very fortunate that the brands that I work with, I've had long relationships with. And it was been easy for me in the sense that I know that like they trust me with their stuff.
Sure.
Because there's always that process when you go out and build new business and that sort of thing. You have to gain that and you have to be able to build it. But kind of the easiest thing for me is like being able to work in this industry, in this wheelhouse that, you know, I'm so passionate about, with brands that like I was a customer first.
Right.
Before I started working with them, and that they know that I'm a person that has like their best interest at heart.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So how do you charge? Like, how do you bill? Are you on retainer typically by people? That's
Yeah,
a
I'm on
monthly
retainer.
thing,
No,
or
it's,
per project?
It depends on what it is. So I try, retainer.
Yep.
And then it's based on scale. Basically how, what is required of the business. And then I come up with a number, and then I negotiate with each client that comes to a number which we think is fair, that sort of thing. I'll also do some projects, whatever, I've done a couple projects, whether it be like 3 months sort of thing, whether that's like a store opening or doing like a small brand launch, like I'll do that too. And then like I'll kind of build that out, turning on the fee of what the scale that needs to be. But mostly I run this on a retainer, just in terms of ease of it, right? If you can lock in a retainer and you can have people work with you and brands that you're passionate about, it just, and it's also extremely important your first year, I feel too, is because you're already stressed enough as a new business owner trying to figure out like all these other things. Like the last thing you kind of like, the money, right? So like if you are able to figure out a system that has a consistent cash flow for you, it takes a huge amount of stress off.
Going back to the watch thing, obviously being in the Hodinkee office, you were wearing a Swatch for 2 years.
Yes.
Prior to that, were you much of a watch guy? Like, or is it
No.
just all pressure from the office?
No, it's not pressure from the office. So I got spoiled when I was working for HWPR. Yeah, at a 15400 ST, right? The 40 millimeter Royal Oak, and I had that, and as like a 22-year-old. Just have no concept of what this was. It was crazy. Like it was just like I had.
You
to give
still
it,
have that watch?
No, I had to give it back when I.
Oh,
left.
I see. I see.
It was a loaner, so I was like, "Hey guys, I do your PR. I'm at these events. I should be wearing your watch." And like, yeah, no, I had a lawyer. I thought it was a valid thing, but it was like crazy. Like just being on the subway and you're that young and you have like no idea. And like you're like, God, this thing's so heavy. You're like, it's because it's a heavy watch, and you're like, oh my God, like. And it's just there, and you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this. And like you go home, and like I was living in like with 3 other people in an apartment, and you're like, you have like your box, and you make sure you put it away, and like no one's gonna steal anything, but like you're so particular with it,
sure,
and you like appreciate it that much more, and things like that. So
you got a watch on your wrist now that you bought yourself as an anniversary gift,
yes,
/
wedding gift
to
myself.
What did you buy?
So I bought Datejust from 1970s. Engine tuned bezel, all stainless, because I thought it was nice not to have that really shiny factor. Really cool. It's a gray dial here, Sigma dial, all that sort of stuff. So the kind of fun thing about it is it belonged to a guy who apparently IBM used to give away Rolexes as gifts. He worked at IBM for 25 years, and he got this watch as a 25-year present. So on the back it says in service of the gentleman's name and the IBM logo, which I thought is very cool.
Yeah.
Because when I was going through this whole watch process, because I never really bought watches for myself. Like I had some Autodromos because I work with Bradley. I bought myself that Swatch because the Swatch looks way more expensive than it actually cost me, and I wear a lot of tailoring, so it fit really nicely underneath my suits and that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But I had never really bought a watch for myself, so like this was like the first watch that I. At the next level, I thought that I had really bought for myself. So I bought this one, and I was like, I need something that I could like wear every day, and like this was that kind of watch for me. So yeah.
What you said that you've traveled historically, obviously to Italy and such, but like, what role does travel play for you now? Do you have to travel much for
I
work?
don't have to travel.
Seems most of the connections either they have a brick and mortar in New York or they have offices here.
I don't have to travel very often. I would like to. It's not a regret, but it's the one thing that I would love to do more of. I try to think myself of a worldly person. I think living in New York, and sorry if this sounds a little conceited or right now, but you get to expose to a lot of other things that that's one reason why I love being here. Is like I like to be challenged. I like to see things that are different. I like to every day wake up and it's like a new experience in a way.
Sure.
It's good or bad, but it's new.
Yeah.
And I'm a person that doesn't like stasis, right? I like change. But travel is something that like I'm going to invest more in because I think it's extremely important. But this year is just a bit tough just because of trying to do a business and it's not going away. And I have the fortune, I'm lucky that I have some clients that do stuff in Italy, like for pity and that sort of stuff. And I will get there for them. I've done pity a couple times just for Xenia and things like that. But
cool.
I eventually will go there and that sort of thing. But no, not much travel as of late. So, which has been kind of good because it's the one less thing I have to worry about when you have all these other things just kind of going on in your life.
Sure.
So,
well, as a New Yorker now, I guess.
Yeah.
So a lot of people aren't car people here. You've worked with the likes of Maserati, again,
Sure.
through Xenia. Are you much of a car guy?
So I'm a car person in terms of aesthetics. Just because I like work in the business of aesthetics.
So what are you drawn to?
I mean,
do you own a car?
I don't own a car. I grew we didn't have cars. We didn't have fancy cars growing up. My dad drove like an hour and a half every day to work. So like he needed stuff that was dependable. I mean, we had a Buick Century that we drove to 227,000 miles.
Oh my God.
That was my high school car. We had a Chrysler 300M Pro-Am edition, which was like, I loved that car. I had like the 17-inch chrome wheels. It came with like two-tone seats. Beautiful car.
Sweet.
I had that in college, which was like pretty luxe. Because I also worked in Res Life and we got like a parking pass. So I got like the nice garage. Oh, it was pretty great. Having like a car in college, right?
That's awesome.
That got passed down to my sister who, I'm sorry, Claire, but you didn't take very good care of it. And it really hurts me to this day. And this is like a long time ago. No car here in the city.
Yeah, it's tough.
Doesn't make sense for me right now or my lifestyle. I go up the Hudson Valley quite often, which I think a car might make a little bit sense. I mean, I take the train, which is so easy, but I like to get something that like, if my fiance and I were just like Saturday morning, we're just like, you just want to go for a drive and like, let's just go do it. Then we would do that. But
so you rent a car?
No. I mean, we'll rent a car when we go for like do little vacations up there.
I see.
But it's usually just like a Chevy, like Impala or whatever, or something like that. That's not too expensive or whatnot. So.
What do you guys do up there?
Well, I mean, I love it because you get out of the city, right? I mean, they started a whole painting school just based because how beautiful it is, like, the Hudson Valley, painting. I mean, at heart, I'm really like a 67-year-old retiree who wish he worked for like the National Park Services and gave tours of historical homes. It's very specific, but it's true.
That can happen.
Yeah, I would say maybe one day when I turn 67. I got some years to go. But we'll go up there to visit a lot of historical homes. I go up there because I'm a history buff, and I particularly love 18th century American history. And there's like no better place to be technically than like here on the East Coast and also the Hudson Valley because there's so much history there.
Oh, sure.
Also, there's a ridiculously good beer scene happening in the Hudson Valley. Lots of really good beers. So I'm a big beer fan.
What's your go-to? Do you give me a couple? So
Hudson Valley Brewery is delicious. That's in Beacon. It's like drinking beer juice. It's ridiculous. It's so good. Suarez is an also fantastic brewery. Industrial Arts is also awesome up there as well. New York has a pretty good beer scene as well. It's people coming here. Like there's.
There's Brooklyn Brewery.
I'm sorry, Industrial Arts up there. Their other half is awesome. Threes Brewing in Gowanus. Also, those like Folks Beer and in Carroll Gardens. There's Grimm over in East Williamsburg. So I'm a beer guy. So like having all these things around is like been really good the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm obviously based in San Diego, which is like world renowned for IPA.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks to Stone and Ballast Point and all these guys. What style of beer are you into?
So, I mean, technically it's like New England IPAs.
Okay, sure.
There's this stuff that's very juicy. It's like kind of very hoppy, very juicy. I'm very lucky here that there's a fair amount of guys in the Hodinkee office that are also big beer drinkers as well.
Sure.
So there's actually a great beer bar. I'm not going to give the name away from our offices because I don't want people to hit it up because it's our spot. But they have like a really good selection. Like New England IPAs are really good. Did sours for a while, but then I feel like they just kind of blew out my taste buds. So I'm kind of like trying to slow that down a little bit. So that's kind of my stuff. Basically anything that like tastes like beer, that's beer, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just stuff that's easy and fun and kind of delicious to drink. And there's a whole bunch of great stuff now that's just, that's fun. I feel like, beer is getting the wine treatment in a sense that people understand that there's all these varieties now and you can have fun with, and there's nuance. Yeah. And you can have fun with this sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you recently ate at Carbone, I see.
I did, yes.
How was that?
Excellent.
I have yet to try it.
So
it's on the list.
It's on the list. Okay, so I've known Mario for a little while because when I was at Xenia, Shauna Brooke, who was the VP of marketing, still a VP of marketing PR there, was friends with him. And we were doing an event. And so I would always do the celeb dressing sort of stuff in my capacity as the PR manager. And so I go to the store and he meets me there. And I know who he is. And obviously he doesn't know I am just a PR guy. And we start talking. And he's like, I'm like, all right, so what do you want to wear for your event? Yeah. And he's like, oh, I want to wear what you're wearing. Like my outfit. I was like, oh, like, you sure? Like there's something, we have all this other stuff. Because I was wearing a blue blazer, blue shirt, navy knit tie, and gray wool trousers, just very simple, and that sort of thing. He's like, no, like that exact same look. And I was like, all right, cool, man. So that's how I met him because I started dressing him for Xenia events and that sort of stuff. And then we just developed a good rapport, a good relationship. And then while I was working there, I went to dinner there. I took now my fiance there for our 5-year anniversary. Went there, got the whole. It's just an amazing experience. Got the whole thing and, was so just taken back. Like the next day, like I brought like a tie to our waiter, and then like our the wine, sommelier. I brought like a bottle of cologne and all that sort of stuff. And I wrote Mario a letter. I was like, "You're successful enough. I don't need to give you anything." So
that's awesome.
And then and I just went back for the fiance's 30th birthday, and she's been literally talking about it for like 5 years. And so I was like, this is the time to go back. And so there were 3 months ago, I emailed them and just being like, can I get a reservation? And they're like, sure. So I'm not the one who like a week before, don't do that. I'm not that guy. Right. I knew this was going to be a thing. Yeah. So I was like, just emailed, and they're like, yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. So
that's awesome.
Was fortunate enough and had a great dinner. She loved it. So she had a good birthday. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What, so just kind of lastly, wrapping things up.
Sure.
What advice would you give somebody who might want to start their own PR agency or just dip their toe in PR?
Sure. Couple things. If you want to start your own agency, I think what you like in order to be successful right off the bat or to build towards success, I think you have to be able to have some things in your back pocket, right? You can't just like go out, and you can go out and just start something and then like work for business, right? But I don't necessarily think that's like sort of sustainable. I think what you kind of have to do is you have to have like an idea, and you have to work on it for a while, and you have to really develop a relationship with people around you who will then invest in you, whether that's money or time or that sort of thing, and you take their advice, and then when the opportunity presents itself, then it goes out.
Sure.
I think you have to, you don't have to do it this way. You can do whatever way you want, right? This is the way I did it, and I've only been doing it for a year. Who knows where I'll be a year from now, but at least I got through a year, and in all intents and purposes, I feel like it's been a success. But the way that I kind of looked at it was like, I knew I had something, and I didn't make that jump until like I knew I knew I could sustain it.
Right.
Like I wasn't interested in like going out and finding an investor. I wasn't interested in like looking for equity. I wasn't really interested in that. I was interested in trying to build something that was going to be mine, so I didn't have to give anything up. And then being able to have those clients there who would be partners. You got to find people who will want to be partners and invest in you. And I think I've been able to do that. And that's just because I've been in this for a while.
Right.
And I've built these relationships, and, you know, they value them as much as I value them. So if you want to get into PR, I think you have, and it's this old, everyone's going to say it, but I'll say it too. You are right. You had mentioned earlier there's perception that it's all fun and games and that sort of like stuff.
Yeah.
No, it's not. You do have a lot of fun. And I'm very fortunate that I'm in a position that I get to work with brands that are like I personally have an interest in. So it's even more fun.
Yeah.
But you will work on, like I said, I worked on maternity wear. I worked on like laundry. Like that's not fun to me. Like those were like the weirdest market appointments ever. Being like, here's the thing. Like, just take it. Whatever. Yeah. Just hopefully you put it in the magazine, right? There was like no passion behind because it just like wasn't my thing.
Yeah.
I think you got to be able to. I think one is never think that the job's too small. I think people, and that's not like, oh, we have to go get coffee for something like that.
Right.
Never think that, like, you might think for a minute that job might, or that task might be irrelevant, but there's always a lesson in that thing. So don't forsake that, you know, pay attention. I think another thing is you should know is like, understand who you're actually writing to and like the audience that what you're trying to tell your story to.
Right.
That was a lesson that I learned on really early on, is that like don't send something to somebody that it's not going to be relevant to anything at all. And even if it's like you have to because it's like a client, that sort of thing, you know, people hire you because you're supposed to be an expert. So it's almost on them if they don't take your advice, right? You'll do it because that's your job, but you're there to tell them when you think it should be different. So I think learning and understanding like that balance of who you're emailing and like what they'll like, and just being cognizant of that, because like I said, learn to be a resource, learn to be an asset. Don't be the person who like, oh, I got another email from that about a product that's totally irrelevant to me.
Right.
I think learn to be a decent writer. Don't have to be great, but you got to be able to take a big idea and basically put it into a paragraph. So learn how to be an editor in that sense. So learn how to be an effective writer. I'm not a great writer. I'm a decent writer. My editing skills are terrible, punctuation, all that sort of stuff, but that sort of thing. But I think I'm decent at being able to take an idea and kind of put it down and make it interesting for somebody. So I think learning how to do that is extremely important, especially early on, because you will get jobs which don't think like you might not be even doing pitching, but pay attention to those things of like how they're phrased. And that's also is extremely helpful if you have bosses who allow you to do that and give you a license, and will be able to mentor you for that. Because I've been very fortunate that from where I wouldn't be here now if I didn't have those people who invested in me and who thought that I could do a good job.
Sure. So, that's fair.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's like I wouldn't, you know, they gave me the opportunity, and you have to take it obviously, but there has to be the opportunity. So
that's awesome. Well, speaking of opportunities, thank you, Nick.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this man. This is super fun.
I'm always used to always used to talking about other things, not about myself.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting and fun to be on the other side.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Great to see you.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. See ya. I'd like to thank Nick one more time for the conversation. Really enjoyed hearing his story and how he's come so far in such a short amount of time. Also, a big thanks to Clear Audio for providing the headphones for the podcast. And big shout out to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for providing the theme music. Thanks so much, everyone. See you next week.